The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
When we talk about poverty in the United States, we often look at the federal poverty line, but there's a new study from the Economic Policy Institute which looks at poverty a little bit differently, which is in order to meet the basic needs of a three-person family. And the reason why they're looking at a three-person family has a lot to do with the average household size of the United States, which sometimes makes individual earnings numbers sort of a little bit deceptive, or not so much deceptive, but maybe not really representative of the buying power that provides for meeting basic expenses. It basically said that if you have a family of three people, that if they're earning under $48,000 a year together, that they would have difficulty meeting basic needs, that their circumstances would sort of be consistent with poverty. Now, when you think about those numbers, how they might break down, you could imagine a family of two parents with one kid. Of course, the kid's not going to be working. And with childcare so expensive, you might imagine that you have one parent working full-time and another parent maybe working part-time and providing childcare. So you would think, okay, well, if the parent working part-time is earning $16,000 a year and the full-time parent is earning $32,000 a year, that would sort of be the minimum before you would be considered functionally poor. Now, this, Pat, is different from the federal poverty line and that which would qualify you for certain welfare benefits, social welfare benefits of different kinds. But it's sort of more operational poverty. And I think that this is an interesting way to look at it, which is what are the basic needs that one needs, sort of makes sense. Yeah. And what is required in terms of income in order to meet that. And it's an interesting approach which shows that if you look at families, close to half are functionally poor.
So when you add up both those who are below the poverty line and those that are kind of flirting with it, that's when you reach to about half of Americans.
Right.
And it makes sense, too, because wages have stagnated since the 1970s, and yet costs of everything else are going up. We see food doubling in price since that time. We see housing times 3 and college times 11. And of those three things that I listed, those are, expenses that you can plan on.
Sure.
Because it's going to be roughly the same week to week, month to month. But also we have medical expenses times 6, and sometimes those come up in emergencies, and you may not have the savings to take care of that if something like that comes up.
And the first one you mentioned, which is the cost of food, the federal poverty line that was established in the 1950s was based largely on the cost of food. However, as Pat is pointing out, the cost of food has gone up drastically since the 50s, since the 70s,
Doubled.
since the 80s. Housing has tripled. You've got medical expenses, which are up. College tuition is 11 times higher than it was in 1978. And when you consider that, those increases have not been accounted for in what the federal poverty line is. It's very easy to say, okay, here was the federal poverty line in 1978, and we will do an inflation adjustment to 2017. Okay, that represents currency inflation, but it doesn't consider that the actual cost of many of the elements that you need for day-to-day survival have increased way beyond inflation alone.
And that's why it's all relative, and it's so preposterous when people like the Koch brothers go out there and say, well, $45,000 for a family of 3, that'll get you really far in India, or that'll get you really far in China. I mean, you have to compare that to the cost of living.
No doubt about it. Cost of living is sort of like the key aspect when we're comparing poverty. Purchasing power parity is one measurement that's sometimes used. In other words, what amount of money do you need to buy some consistent amount of goods or services? There's a number of ways we can look at it, and very few of those ways are actually being done. But what we do know is the federal poverty line has not kept up with the actual cost of things. It's kept up with inflation, but not things, very serious things, as our president likes to say. Presidential counselor Kellyanne Conway told you on the regular show today that she has resurfaced after this post-Bowling Green massacre hiatus. She immediately imploded in multiple national TV appearances. She recently said in an interview at a conservative summit over the weekend that much of the criticism against her is gender-based. And I think this is so interesting for a number of reasons, not the least of which is that the right is often the one pointing to the left and saying, you're wrong that X criticism or Y point of view about a person is based on their gender. Typically, there's this caricature of the left saying someone is being treated this way because they're a woman. Someone is being treated this way because they're not white. Someone is being treated this way because they're not rich or even middle class. Oftentimes, that's correct. We all are aware of instances in which it seems that the identity of someone is maybe inaccurately portrayed as the main lens through which whatever point of view is being made is there. But it's very interesting to see Kellyanne Conway, who would normally be defending her side against those sorts of accusations, make it about those who criticize her now.
And you can also flip it, too, because I remember when it seemed like Hillary Clinton was going to win and be the first female president.
Sure.
People on the right would say, well, it has, nothing to do with her gender, but more so her merits. But then when Kellyanne Conway led the Trump team to victory, all of a sudden she was the first female campaign manager to win a presidential election for her candidate, and that was something of significance. So it goes both ways.
It's a double standard that we see applied regularly in many different ways, and now Kellyanne Conway trying to apply it in what I can't imagine would be an audience particularly friendly to that idea. But of course, the audience loved it. When it's Kellyanne Conway saying she's being slammed, all of a sudden the same people who say there is no more racism in this country, there is no gender discrimination, whatever the case may be, applauding and saying, you go get them, Kellyanne. Now they love it.
And I feel like it may be true to some extent, but it's kind of like the wage gap numbers. Like, it's not the 77 cents on the dollar that is put out there. It's maybe closer to like the 91-cent number or the 92-cent number. And some of the difference there you may be able to attribute to gender biases. But overall, I think it's an insignificant thing. And a lot of people pointed to Hillary Clinton losing the election because she was a woman, maybe because the United States wasn't ready to elect a female. I don't think that's the case at all.
I don't think that's the case at all.
If you put Elizabeth Warren up as the Democratic nominee, I think she would have crushed Trump. And I don't think it has too much to do with the fact that she's a woman.
I don't know. I don't know if she would have. Liberal female senators from Massachusetts may not be the persona that fares the best. But there's an argument to be made in any case, no doubt about it. And we were talking about, 77,000 votes in 3 states. The thing about that I think is sometimes difficult, Pat, is when there's an infinite number, almost infinite number of factors. I know that the term almost infinite doesn't mathematically make sense, but there's an endless number of factors that influence an election. And so it's very difficult to say, well, if all had been equal except Hillary Clinton was a man, would she still have lost by 77,000 votes across those three states? If Russia had not attempted to interfere, we don't yet know to what extent they succeeded in interfering, then we might have the first female president. It's very hard to parse out the effect of a single factor. But with Kellyanne Conway, what seems abundantly clear is that everybody on the Trump side that's wacky has been getting it hard. It's been Kellyanne Conway. It's been the male Sean Spicer. When that Stephen Miller dude gave that completely unhinged rant.
Where is he gone? He was gone on all completely. The Sunday morning talk shows, and now he's
gone. I mean, that was a total and utter embarrassment. So, yeah, it's certainly possible that gender is a lens through which Kellyanne Conway is perceived. I mean, after all, one of the first things we identify about people when we meet them is what their gender is, right?
Sure.
You're not necessarily saying, let me think about whether I'm talking to a man or woman, but it's just immediately sort of perceived and noticed and
even subtly when you're talking about them, you say he, she, right?
No doubt about it.
Gender pronouns, and that's something that even comes before someone's race, you'd say.
So it would be wrong for me to write this off when Kellyanne Conway says it, because gender discrimination is something that exists. At the same time, what she's doing is wacky, and what Sean Spicer has done is wacky, and name whoever you want, and nobody is avoiding the criticism. She avoided it when she went off air, right after the Bowling Green massacre. Stephen Miller is avoiding it because he's gone, but they all take heat.
It's just a way, I think, to not have to take responsibility for your mistakes. So with Kellyanne Conway, there's been many of them.
Yeah.
Bowling Green massacre, alternative facts, all of that stuff. But, I think we see plenty of women in the Trump administration who are able to hold their own, like
Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
We don't agree with anything she has to say.
No.
But she at least does a pretty good job of the indefensible, which is defending the Donald Trump administration.
Yeah, I find her vile and repugnant in many ways.
Right.
However, she is not getting pushed around. She is not getting criticized. She's getting criticized for the substance of what she's saying because it's absurd. But she's not being criticized for it in the way that Kellyanne Conway is, because she's not saying the cartoonish, crazy stuff that Conway is saying.
And she's doing a much better job as the fill-in White House press secretary as Sean Spicer was, and obviously Spicer's a man.
Absolutely, absolutely. The head of the U.S. Air Force's Air Combat Command is now looking for permission to shoot down civilian drones that are threatening to interfere with flight operations. And there have been 2 incidents recently, one involving an F-22 Raptor, which have shown that the military is sort of defenseless against what is it's a nuisance, but it's a potentially really damaging nuisance. And drones are becoming a bigger and bigger incident. I recently saw a video posted online of someone who set up their drone, must have been at about 300 or 400 feet, very close to an active airport runway, but just outside of the glide path of the airplane. So basically the airplanes would be landing right in front of the drone. The drone was off to the side. So if you're on target for the runway, you wouldn't hit the drone. Well, but it violates every FAA guideline. Okay. You can't fly near airports. I mean, it's illegal. It's against the law, and you could be subject to I believe it's a $27,000 fine for each one of these incidents.
I'm surprised it's not more, because if you shine a laser pointer at an aircraft, you can go to jail for like life or something crazy like that.
That can't be true.
Maybe that's hyperbolic, but it's a
you
big
can go to
penalty.
jail. You can go to jail. Yeah. So anyway, how is this going to be dealt with? Because there's really no mechanism if that drone is above a residential area. It's going to be something that airports would hesitate to do if they even had the technology to just shoot down the drone. So it's a nuisance that could be an incredibly expensive nuisance. I don't know the physics of whether, I mean, certainly if a drone got sucked into an airplane engine, I assume that's disaster, that could cause untold damage. If a plane hits a drone, some of these drones weigh 1.5 pounds, similar to a bird in many ways. Would that really endanger the plane? I don't know, but you don't want to have to figure that out.
I think that if it hits an engine, it definitely could. You remember the flight in New York City that had to be landed on the harbor, the Hudson? Yeah. That was taken down by bird strikes on both engines. So if it could happen with birds, I'd imagine with a drone, same thing could happen.
Yeah, no doubt. No, I mean, the engine is absolutely possible. And if you're flying a drone near an airplane, how much control will you have to make sure that if the airplane hits you, you're not getting sucked into the engine? I mean, it's absurd. If it hit, the nose of the plane, I assume that it would just shatter and the plane would be okay. But still, my understanding is that here in Boston, the area around Logan Airport is sort of like one of the top areas where you should not even try to fly drones because they will make an example out of you. But just the other day at one of the beaches in the area that's very, very close to the airport, I saw someone flying a drone about 100 feet off the beach, and nothing happened.
Well, I think the Air Force definitely should have the authority to shoot these down, and
really?
Oftentimes, yeah. And oftentimes, I mean, we're behind the times when it comes to the law because these things move so slowly.
Sure.
And this is a relatively new technology.
But what about the damage that could be done by the falling drone if the Air Force starts shooting these down?
See, that's something I hadn't considered.
That's something
because it could fall on someone.
That's exactly right.
And maybe it is safer up in the air.
I don't know. I mean, it's just a mess. It's like with internet law, where the way that these technologies are used is not even really reflected yet in what the law is.
This whole shooting down drones thing is one of the deterrents for maybe Amazon starting a delivery system where they use drones. Because I'd imagine, even though you're not able to steal mail, that's obviously a crime, a federal crime.
Yeah.
If a drone is carrying a package over someone's private property out in rural America, I don't think anyone would have any second doubts about shooting that thing down. And
we've seen drones shot down by people in rural areas as part of the whole, homestead sort of mentality. But sort of another angle to the story. Anyway, we'll see what ultimately happens with the Air Force. We've got a tremendous week of programs for you. And maybe towards the end of the week, I'll announce the new format text that we're going to be doing. That'll be something to talk about a little bit later in the week.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.